And then we'll wrap up with exit tickets. I'm going to try to leave some extra time at the end of class, maybe, 5-10 minutes for everyone to fill out the exit tickets instead of like pushing it past straight into 10 and then asking for that feedback. I think that's a lot. So let's do this. Course tracker. So this is the feedback. I've hidden everyone's name, so unless you remember what score you left, unless you remember what comments, you won't know what these scores represent. But this is all day 2 and day 1. So once again, we only have 2 classes. So for day 2, these are the scores, not something I'm trying to hide. Sometimes I'm effective at teaching. Sometimes I'm not as effective. Sometimes it's really well organized. Sometimes I left off the classes. I try to push through, didn't hit all those marks. So once again, I can get, wasn't organized sufficient time. I was pushing through. And so funny enough, I added classes right towards the end. I was like, I think I can get through classes. Let me put it on the agenda. And that wasn't a good call, right? So should have left it off and just pushed it to the next class. Just to show some dichotomy, agenda was well organized, however, felt very fast, right? Fast was the main theme here. Like I lost track in the middle of the lecture and the content was delivered a bit fast, right? Unable to reach the section to convert functional components into class-based. Once again, because we just didn't have time. There was just too much material. The second code along felt rushed. The diagram that I drew, I'm glad the diagram I drew helped, and I'm going to introduce more of those diagrams as well. So I have a diagram for the React films also, one for the your to-do list. I was using the color switcher app to draw the diagram, but I have one for the to-do list also. And then, once again, just felt a little fast. They were having computer issues, so that obviously slowed them down. But so I'm going to try to slow it down. Pushing through just to get through everything, to me, has never been the best way to teach. I'd rather everyone understand the material first and foremost. And if rushing means we got through it, but you didn't really get it, well, then rushing isn't the solution, right? Taking our time to understand it. That's the best way. Now, as far as asking questions in class, I'm not always, when I'm coding along, I'm not looking at the screen. So I have a screen over here where I see everyone's faces, and then I'm coding along over here. So I don't see everyone. So if you do have a question as I'm coding along, what I'd like you to do is just come off of mute and ask the question, okay? So feel free to come off and ask questions at any point in time that you have a question, and I'll stop and I'll answer the question. You can also Slack. Once again, as I'm teaching, I'm not necessarily looking at the Slack as often. I'm just kind of focused on what I'm doing. But Abdul is watching the Slack channel also, could possibly answer those questions. But once again, I prefer you just ask. Stop me. Say, hey, Joe, I was looking at this thing. What does that mean? I'd be glad to answer those questions. If you have that question, then I'm sure other people have a similar question. So we can just kill 2 birds with 1 stone and answer those questions. Cool? All right. I think we're out of that. So the next thing that we were going to do is homework review, right? So we got here asking questions, homework review. Before I do the homework review, I'm going to Slack this little poll out. It's an anonymous poll. I don't know who's answering what. I'm just trying to get a feel of the homework. So here's the poll. It is anonymous. And I just want to know. I was watching that homework spreadsheet since last week, and I noticed, some people forked it, added it, and I was just periodically going through it, just seeing how everyone was approaching it. And some people reached out, some people didn't reach out. I just kind of want to see, did you really think it was super tough? Somewhat challenging, and then was it fairly easy? All of it could have been done using functional components. I know the app component itself was a class-based component, but all of those components could really have been created as functional components, although the instructions at one point in time did say this dot props. And if you saw this dot props, you're probably like, what the hell is that? I didn't learn that. And so you might have opted to do the class-based, which is something you did learn as part of the pre-work. So pre-work did cover the class components, and that's really what they kind of stressed from the beginning. I always push the functional components. So there's a lot of curriculum out there to teach React. And a lot of the React material always started with class-based components. Here's class, learn it all, and then we'll downgrade a functional. I kind of flip it. I prefer to start with the most basic thing, the one thing that you need to get a React component up and running, and then layer on the complexity as you need it. If I don't need it to be a class, then I don't turn it into a class. There's just no point in going that extra distance. So 2, 8, 9, 10. All right. So it looks like 10 responded. And all right. So it's between somewhat challenging, fairly easy, and 2 really toughs. Okay. Maybe the really tough was, I don't know. If it was really tough, just reach out to me. Have some questions for me, and I'd be glad to help out. Or, once again, if it was really tough, reach out to me between classes and just say, hey, I'm having a hard time on this. Can you point me in the right direction? Awesome. I did also ask everyone to post a question. I don't know if everyone saw that. So posting questions so that I can help kind of gauge if anyone had a question about the homework or just in general. I'll just quickly go through the questions. We'll kind of get them out of the way, and then we'll jump into just the homework review. I just want to show that really quickly. Is there an easier way to pass props? Looks like props passing through multiple components can get confusing, and yes, it is, and it can get confusing. And so what we're going to be doing is, I think it was also this one too, is it in bigger apps, based on what we know, it looks like we might have to pass props down through multiple components. So it looks like the same kind of question. And so to answer that, React gives us this thing called context, which is native to React. And then there's third-party tools called Redux. So if you've been following React for a while, you might have heard Redux thrown out there. But also context is another way to pass down props multiple components deep and get it from here to here without having to like redefine it along the way. All right, and we're going to go into context later on, not today. Their best practices around organizing CSS styles when you have many components. Yes, there's like 4 different ways off the top of my head to do CSS, and we have a module for that also, so we'll get into that. But there's things like styled components, or creating styles locally within the particular component, or a CSS file associated directly with that particular component also. The idea of components is what? Can anyone, just from what we've been doing with components, what's the general concept of a component? What are we trying to do with components? Can anyone answer that?
You're modularizing. Reusable?
Yeah, we're modularizing, right? For the intent of what? So I broke the app down into smaller and smaller pieces, right? What's the point of modularizing it? So like,
well, all the time.
Reuse it.
Reusability, yeah, reusability, right? Similar, right? Yeah. So reusability, which means if I would like to reuse a component that has specific styling, I probably want to localize that styling to the component versus having to import some monstrosity of a CSS file like you do with Bootstrap, right? Bootstrap, you got to import this huge CSS file, and then it covers every gamut that Bootstrap could cover in regards to styling. But components, you know, they're smaller. So maybe I want to either associate a CSS file with it, so that's just localized, or put the CSS inside of the JS file. So you know how we've learned up to this point to like separation of concerns, like CSS over here, JavaScript over here, HTML over here. React is kind of like bringing it all together, which is, you know, this kind of reverse concept of what we've learned for years. Like everything should be separated, and maybe they shouldn't be separated. Is there a standard for naming conventions? File names, components, the creation of multiple component files can make it hard to code and read the app as a whole. Is there a trick? I'm not going to say that there is necessarily a trick, but there's best practices. I did put a link in here to a project from a previous student who was building this out for my React class, actually my JavaScript class. So when the minute I introduced React, they kind of ran with it. And I just want to point out here that it's a pretty robust app. And they broke all the components down into folders to organize them. And those folders then had the actual components that were associated with that kind of higher overarching category, like browse. And so there's a browse new, browse recs, right? Browse view. I'm not sure why playlist is in there, but playlist is in there, and all the CSS files. So this was a way that they organized everything. Detail all of these components. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 components within the details view folder. So you can see that as apps grow, the complexity grows, and then trying to create more smaller reusable ones and organize them starts to become the issue, right? Right now we just have, I don't know, an app, a form, a to-do list, and a to-do list item. Pretty easy, nothing too complex there, but in much larger apps, there's just going to grow. You're going to start to grow exponentially in all sorts of directions, and then there is going to be the need to do a better job of organizing. What we're doing right now is just creating a components folder, right, to put the 4 components. That's really it. But we could possibly start creating subfolders for like form, and there'll be form.js and form CSS, right? So the two can be associated with one another. Okay. I mean, you can look through this at any point in time you want, but you know, you can see here that they're importing the CSS files for these things as well, and then the components are down here. They're using router. A lot of functionality here we'll get into once we get to those specific things. Okay. Compartmentalize, yeah. Okay. Just wanted to address some of those questions. I'm always going to ask questions maybe on that first Tuesday, collect some new stuff. So homework review, I'm going to take a look at the solution, okay? What I also want to point out too is in the spreadsheet, you did or could have taken a look at, so if I just go back to the homework spreadsheet, right? Code sandbox, instructions, here's the spreadsheet, right? Now, I'm not kind of promoting this as like, I'm always going to do this thing, but everyone was responsible for putting links to their homework here, right? If you are stuck on something and you see that someone posted their homework, take a look at their homework. Like, I'm about you learning how to do it. I don't want you to struggle for hours on end trying to figure something out. I do want there to be a little struggle, but I prefer you work through the solution, understand it, and replicate it. So if I was to take a look at any one of these solutions, if I knew I couldn't write it and I was stuck, then what I would do is fork a brand new copy of the CodePen that didn't have anything and try doing it again on my own until I can replicate the solution. Because copying and pasting or looking at it and just typing what you see, you're never going to learn doing that. But not having the answer, you're never going to learn how to do it anyway, right? So you always need the answer. You always need a reference. So feel free. I did look at them, and some of them are different. So if you take a look at one, someone used class-based components for everything. In another one, someone used just functional components. Some people imported the TMDP database into index, passed it down to app. Others just imported it to app. So you will see some variations in how people either interpreted the directions or just felt like, this is what I want to do. I got it to work, right? So I was going to take a look. Oh, what happened here? We noticed. There we go. All right, that was wacky. Just going to go to components, and we'll start with our app. So here's our app. And our app was meant to render two child components, film listing and film details. Okay, and both of them were to be passed the films array. Okay, so TMDB films, if I go to the TMDB file, films is an array, right? And it contains objects that contain all the information for these particular movies, right? So that's what we wanted to pass to both of these, films listings and film details, okay? Which means the components need to be created and then imported, as well as if this is where we want to pass down the data, we could import it here, okay? Another solution to importing it there was this second solution here, where I believe they imported it directly into the index file, because here's app, and then they passed it down as TMDB, okay? Different places to do this. If you know what you're doing and you want to do it this way, that's fine, that works. There's nothing wrong with doing it this way, to be honest. You're just passing it down. You're just taking the data higher level and passing it down as props. That's not wrong, right? This is not wrong. If I take a look at index is just like, hey, I'm just going to render app. That's like my thing. I just render app. I don't do anything else. And then app takes it from there. Okay. When we were doing the to-do list and we were doing stuff like that, we were testing out because I wanted you to see how it's like to pass down props, right? And that was like the first place that we were going to pass down props. But it didn't have to get passed down there. So we have film listing and film details, and we're passing down films is the prop name, and then TMDB files is the array of things that we're passing down. If I go to film details, that's really basic, right? This isn't really even doing anything with the data that's passed down. Films listing is, right? And films listing is like, films listing is mapping over the films array and producing a films row. And films row is going to get a film, a key as well, right? Anytime you do the map, anytime you are doing a map, you always include the key. It's pretty much the only time you're going to use the key. And that's because as React does this looping, it needs to keep track of all these things in the array. So the key really helps it assign a unique thing to each object inside the array. And then we just rendered it, right? All films is this, and then JSX, curly braces, put the thing inside, gets rendered. So we know film row, so I'll just go to film row and say, hey, what's happening in film row? In film row is doing that new date, and it's converting it, right? Getting the new date for it, and then calling film poster. And so film poster is going to get a URL for the poster, which is the poster. But then we also have the title, which is it here, and then 2017 is the full year, right? So we have these two components. Actually, this one component, and then this data here. And then if we go to film poster, we see film poster is rendering the film poster, right? We're just giving it the size here, and then we are concatenating that. I think we could have done it this way. What's another way of doing this to concatenate these two? Does anyone know the ES6 way of doing it?
Is it .concat?
.concat would be something like if you were concatenating arrays, I might use that. Here it's called string interpolation. So
like a format in Python, right? Like the curly braces?
Yeah, well, in JavaScript we use backticks. So I'm going to try this. Now, obviously it's going to error out right now. But if I take this, I put the backtick there. I don't need to do plus anymore. I'm going to do curly brace, $, curly brace, and then we're back. Okay? So I'll slack this out. I'm actually going to do this. Watch. I'm going to reverse it so that it works, and then I'll paste the working version in there. So I'll just do this. It works. And then I'll paste also the second way of doing it. ES6 string string template literals. That's what it's called. And then I'll comment it out. I'll comment this out here. Okay. This is just another way of doing it. The backticks signal that this thing can include straight up text, and it can include JavaScript variables that need to be kind of enumerated, right? So instead of doing the concatenation here, which is the old way of doing it, this concatenation method is being replaced, that string concatenation is being replaced with string template literals. So I'll just put a note here that this is ES5 string concatenation, okay? We can go, we'll be doing it this way going forward. Anytime I have to concatenate strings and variables together to create one long thing, I'll always do it this way. I think that was part of the pre-work also. I think so. Awesome. And I think that was it. Okay, that was the solution. And what you can see is, with all of them, I didn't point out, was class-based component, right? Class-based component. Class-based component. Film listing, class-based. App was the only one that was a, I'm sorry, those were functional components. This was the only class-based component. And I think it was class-based because I created it as class. I think that's what it was. So you probably were just like, I don't know, I'm going to leave it like that. That's what he did, so I'm going to leave it. Awesome. Any questions on the homework? Anything like that pops out you might have like super struggled with? Once again, this was one iteration. The other iteration that I showed you had within it all class-based components. So if I go to film details, was it film details from listing? Okay, I thought I did it. No, this one just didn't import here. It just got passed down the props. So that wasn't it. But if you take a look at some of the other homeworks, you'll see class-based components, which I noticed a few did. Okay. Awesome. Once again, you have all these solutions to take a look at, and if they all work, then you know that they work. You can take a look at it. All right.
Hey, Joe, is there a time when you would consider using a class-based component over a functional, or is it just kind of interchangeable?
No, I mean, that's what we're going to go into today. As in, why would we use class-based? Like, what advantages does a class-based component have above a functional component, right? Because there's a reason for that. Now, with the iteration of hooks, which is this new concept, hooks allow functional components to like incorporate class-based functionality. So you still need to know classes. The reason why you need to know the broad scope is this. Hooks are new, and hooks came out with React 16 point, I forgot what version, 16 or 16 point something. And a lot of code up to this point has been written as class-based components. There's a good chance you're going to go to a company that has React already, and they've written up to this point all class-based components, and they are not going back to their code base to like rewrite them as hooks. React even suggests that you do not do that. Don't go back, but writing components from this point on, if you're using this version, sure, use them as hooks, but do not rewrite any of your components, which means you're going to have to support just bare bones functional components, class-based components, and then the new hooks, which is kind of what everyone's starting to write at. And we'll cover hooks in a couple of weeks, maybe like 2 more weeks we'll cover after we hit all the basics. All right. So the 6 topics that I wanted to cover, just so that we can kind of get through a few things before we jump into, was we had covered fat arrows already. We've been building fat arrows, right? So building out I'll just go back to maybe the homework review, right? So if I take a look at these components here that we were taking a look at, you know, app, besides app, film details, right? This is fat arrow. That's a fat arrow component, right? So if we're just writing fat arrow functions, we have to take into consideration that they need to be defined, right? So there's function expressions and function declarations. And so they are going to be expressions. We're expressing it within this variable. So const, I don't know, fat arrow, I'll just call it fat arrow, is equal to that, and then that, right? Nothing too fancy there, nothing to like kind of wrap our head around. But I would ask, like, what's the difference between doing it like that and say doing it as const, you know, functional is equal to function. Like, is there any difference between these two? Like, why are we using fat arrow? So I'm just going to do this. I'm going to console log and say, this is this. And what it really boils down to is the context of this. And we will be seeing that when we get to state. And this is really important. That's only the reason why I'm kind of introducing this. And I'll say console log, this is this, right? Okay. So I'm going to run this fat arrow. Hey, fat arrow, boom. I run it. What do I get? I get this error. Okay, that's kind of weird. I'm getting this error. The error itself in this context isn't really going to be indicative of what I'm trying to convey. But what if I was to run it with this? If I said functional, fast for my own good. If I run this, oh, so functional, I think, let me do this. Function, let me see if this works. Should give us the window component. Oh, let's see what's going on. Function, functional, oop, console log this, functional. I'm gonna put this above this. I just tested this just before I jumped on. So unless functional is some sort of keyword I can't use. No. Function, fat arrow, const. I'm not really sure why that's not working. What this would have done, so once again, I'm not really sure why that's not running, so I'm just going to go to the terminal and see if I can run it here. All right, it works here. Just one of these weird things. Sometimes the REPLs are kind of wonky. And what it shows me is the window. So the window is the whole object, right? The window contains everything, and so I see this window object. And so the context of this is kind of bleeding out of this function also. I mean, it's saying that it's window. The function itself doesn't necessarily have a context of window, right? I mean, it should know what it is. When we get to fat arrows inside of a class-based component, which is kind of where we're going to be using them, we're going to see that the context of this, that keyword, is going to be bound to the actual class itself, okay? So it's going to look inside of the class and be like, hey, someone just referenced this. Who do I ask? And the component is going to say, oh, I'm a class. Ask me. I know everything that's underneath me. The closest I can get to doing something like that, to show you like the context of this and how it's going to pertain to a class-based component, is if I was to create an object, right? So I'm going to say let person is equal to an object, right? Person has a name. Okay, so I'll say, hey, Joe, and then I'll say something like a greeting. I'm going to create a method. Okay, and this method is just going to say console log, and I'll do backticks here. I'll do the string interpolation. Hello, name, right? Now, if we run this and I say person, I'm just going to make sure these methods aren't running here so that they don't error out on me. If I do person dot name, we should just get the name, right? Name Joe. What if I do person dot greeting? Okay, so this is a method inside of an object. Okay, so we're trying to like compartmentalize this function so it's not available throughout the whole scope of the file. It's only localized to person. If we want to call this function, we have to do it in the context of person. Now, if I do this, will it say hello, Joe, or will it just say hello? What do you think? Let's give it a shot. It just says hello. There's no Joe, but we know if I was to do person dot name, we saw Joe. And so the thing is like, well, what does this mean? If I precede this variable with the context of this. Now watch. Hello, Joe. What happens here is that the context of this is saying, hey, this dot name. Where is this dot name? Well, let me go up and ask the object I belong to. If I ask the object is going to be like, oh, I have a this key, and so here's the value that's stored in it. Without the this context, name isn't a freestanding variable inside of this object. And essentially, classes are just that, really fancy kind of objects. That's really what they are. Okay?
Joe, if name was a global variable, would hello name work? And
Yeah.
the second question is, if name was declared inside greeting, would name work as well?
So, oh yeah, if we localized it here, then we have specific scope. So if I did say in here, like, let name is equal to Joe, right? And now we ran this, that should work, right? Because it's localized within the scope of this function. If I was to raise the level of this variable to outside the scope of this object, well, once again, name is probably going to look through the scope level. It's just going to keep going up till it hits the parent scope, asking along the way, hey, I was told to find name. And so they're all going to be like, oh, I don't have name. Go ask the person above me. And then they go up and like, hey, do you have name? I don't have it. Go ask my parent. And you keep doing that till you hit this context. Okay? So, but if name is limited and only available as a key value pair on this object, then in order to ask the object directly, if it has a key of name, then we have to precede it with this. Cool?
Got it.
Okay. This is just JavaScript kind of context and scoping. And so the reason why I bring this up is because this keyword is going to be key when we convert our components to class-based components. Once that happens, this keyword is going to be used everywhere. Props, instead of just props, it's now this.props. Okay? So what I want to do is, only because I want to get through this stuff and I don't want to rush through anything. That's my goal, is to kind of piecemeal it all. What I'm going to do is work through upgrading. And before I go into this counter component here, I'm going to just do this one code along here. Okay? So let me slack this out. Okay? This is a code pin I'm using. I'm going to open this in an editor. So when I share the link, I still have to open it in an editor if I'm going to use it. So you can code along. Once again, you can watch, you can code along. You're going to have your shot at doing it with the to-do list also. Okay, but I'm going to open it up in the editor. So once again, our amazing to-do list, and here our app was being passed down, the title and the colors array. I'm going to go to the components folder because that's where we had our components, and we have our 4 components, right? And our app is a functional component. Didn't really need to be anything else at this point. It will need to be a class-based component in just a few moments. And so let's say that I want this to be a class-based component. Okay, well, there's a few things that we have to consider. Okay, I'm going to convert this particular component to a class-based component. Let's see what we need to do, right? So convert app to class-based component, right? I'll just put comp. All right, first thing you need to do is to define it using the keyword class. Okay, so this right here, I'll zoom in a little bit, needs to change. So the first thing, once I start doing this, you're going to see React break. It's going to break as we do this, right? Here I'm going to say, instead of doing const app is equal to props, right? Instead of doing this, which I'm just going to kind of put here and then comment it out so you can see the big change here, is now class app extends React dot component. Okay, I'm going to make this work, and then I'll go back and explain kind of what's happening with this. Now, React is broken. It's still screaming at me. It's like, wait a second, you can't console log here. With class-based components, you can't just stick console logs anywhere. Like, this is now an object. And like an object, if I went back to this REPL here and I was like, hey, I just want a console log right here. I want to do console log, you know, hello, right? And I run this. That's going to break it because I can't stick a console log in the middle of an object anywhere I feel like. Like, there's a structure to an object. Objects have key value pairs. That's the only thing that you can put inside of an object. If it's not a key with an assigned value, you just can console log whatever you want, any place you want. It breaks it. Same thing goes for this color switching, okay? I can't have console log here anymore. That breaks it, okay? So I'm just going to get rid of it. Now it's going to go to the next error, and it's saying, hey, this div, this return div, you can't do this. The reason is we will return, but a class-based component needs a render method. Okay, so I'm going to wrap this thing, this return, in a render method. Okay, so here we go. I wrapped it up in a render method, and still it's screaming at me. Now, the places that it's screaming at me are these two places, props and props. Okay, so I'm just going to put it, creating it, add our notes, must declare, must use the class keyword, right? And this is the reason why we can't use class for CSS classes, because class is a reserved keyword. So you know how we had to change it to class name when we're doing classes? This is the reason why, because class is a reserved keyword. Okay, the second thing is must include a render method. Okay, that's a must. You cannot get out of this. Must include a render method that returns JSX. And so this is returning. We still have the return keyword here. And then props is now this dot props. Okay, once again, we're back to the necessity inside of here to reference the keyword this, to say you're looking inside yourself for the thing. So if I go back here and I put this dot props, and I go down here and I say this dot props, everything works now. Okay, and they work because, I'm just going to get rid of this comment here, we made all the necessary changes. This is really all we needed to do to get this functional component to be a class-based component. Now, at this point in time, we're not required to use state, but the question is like, why would we have this class-based component, right? Well, because we want to use state. But I still want to cover the fundamentals of what's happening with this class-based component. Now, when the class app extends React.component, what it's saying is there is a React component that's a class of some sort, and we want to extend that functionality. Okay, we want to borrow all the functionality that's inside of the React component and extend this new component that we're creating to inherit all of that functionality. That's what this React component stands for, right? There is a way to kind of reference this using object destructuring, and this was also that was brought up in that article, was if I go to React and when I import React, comma, curly braces, component from React, I could just get rid of this and say component, and it should work. Okay, what happens is React is or has, React is an object at this point in time, and it has a key called component. And I can elicit that key from React and store its return value in this key called component. And this is no different than if we did this. So I'm just going to kind of go back here to our thing here. So we did person.greeting, right? If I wanted to say let name was equal to, or here, let name is equal to person, right? Curly braces, pointing out the curly braces, and I'm saying you're equal to person. Now I'm going to console log this is name, okay? So we know what name is. Now I'm going to console log it, and look, this is name Joe. What I did was I elicited out of the person object the key of name, so the value was returned back, and it stored it in a new variable called name. This would be no different than doing it like this. Let name is equal to person.name. I could have done it like that also. If I did it like that, I'd get the same return value. Those two are identical. This right here is object destructure. This one that we just did here is object destructuring, okay? And this allows us to do that. Now I can elicit multiple things from there too. I could say name, I could say name, comma, and I'm just gonna add a new like faves here. I'll just give it an array of, I don't know, surfing, running, okay? I could do the same thing here and say, hey, faves, create a new variable called faves. It looks inside the person object, finds the faves key, and returns back its value. So I can say this is name, faves, and do the same thing here, faves, okay? If I run it, I'll have two new variables, one called name, one called faves. Faves, what is this saying? Surfing, oh, because I missed the comma. See here? I need a comma there. And now I have Joe and surfing, okay? So Joe is what's stored in name, and faves contains surfing now. So I could elicit out of the object specific keys and store those key values, the values of those keys, in variables, okay? But they have to match. Like name needs to exist here, okay? So if I was like, I don't know, name one, I don't know, is that gonna work? No, doesn't return back Joe because there is no name one in person, okay? I bring that up only because we are gonna do this and you will see this done quite often. So when you do see this, understand that not only are we importing React, the whole thing of React, but we're also importing the React component and storing it within the component variable that we're creating. In all honesty, it's kind of more work right now to do this, right? Because now I have to go up here, do curly braces component, go down here, when I could have just done React dot component, right? To me, that's kind of easier, right? This requires more typing, more keys to type here to do this, because I still have to type component twice, right? The reason why this back in the days might have been an easier way, because the file itself could have had 10 different components. And if I had 10 different class components in here, then sure, eliciting it once and referencing component versus React.component, 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 well, that's a lot of work. The fact that we can do that, I am going to leave it like this, right? Because I really want you to just to associate the destructuring. Whether or not you write it like this is irrelevant, but you will see it written like this quite often. And the fact that you could see this will give you context and say, oh, I know what that is, right? And the more that you do it, the more you'll get to doing it. I'm going to do the same thing with form. The two things in our app that are going to require state are app and form. I'll go into why later. I'm just going through the process of doing that conversion, right? So if we wanted to convert this form, I would do the same thing. So I would say class form extends React dot component, right? Curly braces. I'm going to get rid of this statement here because we don't need this anymore, right? Okay. The next error that I'm going to get is that it's telling me, hey, what is it saying? Form, you can't return. I know that because I need a render. So I'm going to put a render method here. Okay, I get it. So this closes that, that closes that. Oh, because it's not from form. I was misspell that. Okay. I didn't need to do this dot anything here, right? Because props aren't being passed down at this point in time. There is nothing being passed down as a prop here. Okay, but if something was, say I went to app, and you know how it has that placeholder here of add a color, right? I could go to form and say, I don't know, placeholder text is equal to add a real, we got to do this too, curly braces, right? Add a really cool color, right? Okay. Now I'm passing down a prop called placeholder text. That's what I'm passing down, which means if I go to form and I want to replace this placeholder with that custom placeholder that's being passed down, I would have to do it as this dot props dot what I call it, placeholder text, right? Placeholder text, right? And there we go. And then we see add a really cool color. All right? But we have to use the keyword this. That's key to configuring these class-based components. All right. So when it just as that recap for class-based components, because you're about to do this, it'll only take about 5 minutes, maybe max 10 minutes to do it. I want you to kind of work with it. Is converting it requires that you use the class keyword, right? So we convert this const app into something like class app extends component, or I'm going to put react.component because you may not have this up here at some point in time. If you don't, you'll break. Must include the render method. This is a default method that comes with React. We didn't create it. We extended the React component, so we have access to render. Like render is doing some stuff, and then props is now this dot props. All right.
Do you need to pass in or to declare props when you declare the class like we did with functions, or no?
So no, you don't. That's the other kind of anomaly with or difference with class-based components and functional components is like, where do we pass the thing in, right? With functional components, you're like, all right, I pass them in. Like I put a placeholder, an argument called props, and like React kind of put things in there and did its thing. React is doing its thing again. It's doing it under the hood. We don't see it, but it is doing it, and it's passing it the way it would pass any other component, right? But it's doing it under the hood. We don't actually see it doing it, okay? But we know as a class-based component, we have access to props. If something was passed to us, we're going to see it. If nothing was passed to us, then props is really just an empty object. It will be nothing but an empty object, but it will always be an object. Props is always an object, whether or not it has anything defined within it or not. Okay? Any other questions? All right. So, no questions means you.
This might be silly, but
Sure.
is there any way to, like, just to save on this dot props every time? Can you just like assign a variable called props and assign it to this dot props, so you just don't
No, we really can't. Like, you could elicit values from props. Like I could have said something like within the render is a method, which is essentially a function. I could have said something like, hey, const title is equal to this dot props dot title. I could have done that. Then I could have went down here and been like, all right, I'll just call this title. This should work, right? Still works. Joe's amazing thing. Nothing broke. Everything looks pretty good, right? But you really wouldn't do that. I don't know, is it the problem?
I think that was a little too much.
Yeah.
But you could also call const props is this dot props, and then, right?
You could, well, if you're going to call, if you wanted to call this const props is equal to this, like this,
Yeah, or drop the title, right? And then you
Oh, but all right, then it's just that it's the same object that you had before.
exactly, and you can call it the same way you did before too.
Yeah, you wouldn't. Like, you won't do this. This construct right here isn't going to be used. Like, you're just giving yourself more work. You're going to be like, hey, I'm just going to rename the thing because I can rename the thing. Isn't a valid reason to do it. So I wouldn't do that. There will be times when you will want to elicit a value out and maybe do something with it, but this isn't that use case to do it. Okay? Cool. Any other questions? That was a good question, Rafat. That wasn't bad. Jamal, you got a question?
No, well, can you go back to the forms? I wanted to see how it looks again.
So
Okay.
here you're not importing components with React, and you're specifically calling out React.component. It's the opposite of what you did with app, right?
Yeah. I'm showing you kind of both ways. Like, if I had to, I might just opt to do it this way because it seems like it's more work if I was to do, all right, I already just typed in 2 additional characters on top of the need to type in component, right? Let me spell this. I might, if I'm going to do this, why would I type in component again and then have the additional 2 characters, right? I don't know. I may, well then, because then we don't need React. So maybe it is easier to do that. I don't know. However you want to do it. There's no like hard, fast rule for it. Okay? Really. You can do it either way. This way or the other way. You'll see them both. Cool?
What's the purpose of having the export default and the name of the component at the bottom of the file?
You need to, in the world of like React and just Node in general. So Node, we can store functionality in one file and export it into another. Think of it like, you know, when you're working with just like an HTML file, and I put a script tag, and I import jQuery, or I import whatever other library, Lodash or underscore. It takes that whole library and gives you access to it, right? If you didn't add the script tag, you wouldn't have access to the thing. Adding the script tag allows the thing to be exported from the file and imported into your kind of global working space, right? This is the same concept. When this form component gets called in app on line 22, it knows that it has access to all that content because it was exported and becomes imported here. See, the export and the import go hand in hand. If I export something from one file, I can import it into another file. Is that cool, John?
Yeah, thanks. Thank you.
Yeah. And you'll see this done all the time. Even with data. Look, data, I needed to export this data in order to import the data, right? What did I import the data? I imported the data in index. But in order for me to get it, I had to export it. Because if I removed the export here, but if I just defined it as const colors and I didn't export it, I couldn't get it out of this file. It's kind of stuck in the file forever. So the export allows us to remove it from one or provide it as an export to be imported someplace else. Okay? And this allows you to like segment your functionality. Maybe I want to have a JavaScript file that just has helper functions that do things, like my own version of Lodash or underscore. Well, then I can create them all here and then export them and then use them throughout my code, right? One central source of truth that I can just update, and all my other components that look towards that file know that they're getting the same functionality. It doesn't have to be rewritten or copied and pasted into other files. Sweet. All right. So let's do this. I will, you know what? Before we jump into the lab, why don't we take our 10-minute break? I'm going to try to take it at 9 o'clock, always at 9 o'clock. So we're at 8:58. Why don't we come back at 9:08, and then we'll jump into the lab and kind of get you working with the components. Cool? Cool, Joe. Let's do it. Let's go for it. All right. So, yeah, 9:08. I'm just going to jump off video, but I'll be here.
Get. Ah, shit.
Hey, Joe.
Yeah.
Thanks for your help. But just to be clear, so on class-based components, you always have to use this.
Yeah. So props is always referenced or preceded with this.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
Sweet. All right. Come on back. All right. So, I'm going to Slack out. Hopefully everyone's back. I'm going to Slack out the to-do list that you're going to be working on. I mean, you have your version of it. I was just kind of cleaning up previous versions. And for the lab, inside the Trello board for the lab, I have the instructions that I want you to do. So I'll just go through it. Part one, using object not deconstructing, that should have been destructuring. Store React component as component in both the app and the form components. Once again, I want to just emphasize that you know how to do object deconstruction. And then upgrade both the app and form components to class-based components. Keep in mind that props is now this dot props. Once again, I just did that. You're really kind of just redoing what we just did. And then pass down to form a new prop called placeholder text and set it to add a new to-do and then configure the form to use this prop. This is, once again, to confirm that you know that you have to change this to props and pass it down. And plus, it's also adding on, I got to pass a new prop. Can you do it? Okay? Those are the instructions. I'm going to say, all honesty, probably 10 minutes maybe, 10, 15, yeah, right? Not too much. We did it. This is just some basic practice, not trying to spend 30 minutes doing this. So I'm going to set the timer just to be 10 minutes. Okay. And then I'll just add a click here. Click on thumbs up when done. Okay. And I'll just add a thumbs up. When you're done, click on the thumbs up. If we can get everyone done, we'll jump on to the next thing. Okay. Put the instructions kind of back right up there so you can see. Okay. I'm going to just take this over here. Yeah, Damola, I tried answering your question to that, unless, Abdul, you want to add to it. And I will.
Hey, Joe.
Yeah.
Hey, for some reason I can't see the Trello page. Like it's blank for me.
Oh, okay. Can you not access the Trello board, period? John?
I was able to before, but now I don't know what happened. Like I can't even. And I'm at the same URL.
Okay, I'm gonna Slack you directly the URL to the Trello board. Just let me know if you click on it. Can you access it?
All right. Okay.
Is that good?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, sweet. All right. Here's a to-do list. I'll just cover the basic solution for it. I don't think there was anything too crazy here. You were really redoing what we did. Here, our app class extends component, right? Because I did object structuring here. I elicited the components value outside of React and stored it in component, so we use it here. I included the render method, and props is now this.props. Those are the three things you really have to be aware of, right? Class extends, render method, and this.props. If you know those three, you can take any functional component and convert them to a class base. And what's important here is this conversion is, as you structure out your apps, you're going to like maybe write a functional, and then you're like, oh man, this thing really needs to be a class base. So you're going to have to refactor it. Okay. Now, the form, and then I also passed here the form, placeholder text, right? Add a new to-do, and then a form, I repeated the process. Component, class form extends, or render, and then the placeholder text is this.props. Now, the other thing I want to mention here is, here's the React architecture. The React architecture for this to-do list is this, right? Now I'm going to color code these, so when I'm looking at this visual diagram, I will know what is a class-based component and what is a functional component, right? So the fact that I have just a little legend over here, so green is a class, so I would go here and say, all right, so green, I think it's the shade of green, right? That's a class-based. Form is also a class-based component. So I can visually look at my diagram and know, and then, hey, these will be functional components. I think it was this. Maybe I'll choose a lighter shade. Maybe a lighter shade, right? And so these, this one will be a lighter shade too, will be my functional components. So visually, when I see this, I know which ones are class-based, and the reason why they're class. Once again, all we did was convert something to a class. I didn't really say why something should be a class-based component, right? So let's do that. Let's see why you would convert something into a class-based component. Now, the idea of class-based, I'm going to go back to our color switcher app right here, and so this is class, and I'm like, all right, well, why is it class? Right. Think of the functionality that eventually this thing must have. This thing will eventually, we'll be able to type something in here, right, and then submit the thing, and then capture the color, and then store the color here within the array of colors and render that, right? How can I do anything here? Like, I can't really capture anything, and even if I was to take the array of colors, see this? Props, this.props.array of colors, right? What can I really do with this thing if I really wanted to update it? Okay, let's say I was able to like get the form functionality and grab a color. Let's just say that we were able to do that. Let's say that I had access to that color inside of app. How would I update that? I don't know. Maybe I would try to do this. Hey, I got the color. I could work with the color, so let me do something like, I don't know, inside of render, because it's a method, maybe I want to do this dot props dot colors array dot push a new color, red. Nothing happens. And you're like, whoa, that should have pushed it into this array of colors, right? I mean, the colors array is an array. Nothing's happening. I'm getting a problem. Colorless item is defined. That's just colorless item. But nothing's really happening. I really can't do anything here. I can't do this, right? I push it in, but I don't, oh, I do see. Actually, the thing is right here. It's that we don't have a red class, so we're not going to see the thing here. But if I was to capture the form and push it, this happened because the component itself, once it rendered, kind of added something, and then we saw it here, okay? But if the event was to like add something there, how would we dynamically do it, right? So if I captured some input and I did it, how would I do it? So let me do this. A better example is this. Inside of a class-based component, we have a few things that we can use here. So I'm going to define state. Now there's older ways of doing it and kind of newer ways. And so the oldest way of doing it would have been like this. And I'm not going to leave it like this. I'm just going to show it to you, and then I'm going to change it. is adding a constructor and then doing something like super, and then doing, why is this screaming at me? Constructor, super, and then this dot state is equal to, okay. This would have been the old way of doing it. You're going to see that. You're going to see it written like this. This is just an ES6 class, a fully functioning ES6 class. We don't need to have all this overhead of constructor and super now. We don't necessarily need that. With the latest iteration of ES, with the React 6.0, we don't need to do it like this anymore. Okay, what we can do is abbreviate all of that with just this. Watch. I'm going to get rid of constructor, and I'm just going to put state. Okay? So I'm going to put state here, and I'm going to get rid of this, and everything works. So I just added state. Okay? We can do this. This is just the new way of doing it. All right? So React is forever changing, and because it's in this state of perpetual forward motion, you're going to see things done in different ways. So I'm always going to write it like this because I don't want to add constructor. I don't want to add super. I don't want to do those things because they're not needed anymore, but you will see them. So I just kind of wanted to show it, but we're not going to really write it like that. Now, state, the one thing you have to know about state is it's an object. Props is an object. State is an object. You can see the theme here, right? The theme is objects are great ways to store key value pairs, multiple pieces of information. An object is like the thing to store it. So I have here a colors array. And so now I'm going to say colors array colon, because it's an object, is this dot props dot colors array. Right? Nothing's happened. Nothing broke. Still see the same colors. Now, because the state of the app here has this colors array, I'm going to go down here, and instead of referencing props now, I'm going to reference state. So now I'm referencing the information that's stored within inside of this particular app. Okay? I could also do the same thing with title too, right? I have title, so I could go here and say, hey, title is now this dot props dot title, right? I need a comma here because it is an object. And then I can go here and say this dot state dot title. Okay? So within the components, in the class-based component, if you're going to reference state, it has to be this dot state. If you're going to reference props, it has to be this dot props. But I can store some of those values that are being passed down and put them into state. And so the reason is like, why? Why put them in state? What can I do here with this state? So state changes to state force a re-render. That's the one thing I want you to get out of state. If I update state, this component re-renders itself. That's the trigger mechanism. The minute you update state, the component's like, oh man, something changed. I need to re-render. And if I have child components, they need to re-render. And they have child components, then they need to re-render. And it's this whole chain of like, something's changed. We got to like reevaluate everything. Okay? So think of it like this too. I usually kind of describe state like you're in a good mood, so you have this state, right? Your face has a smile on. You're like, you're walking down the street, and you're like, boop-a-doo, I'm really happy. That's my state, right? I have a smile, and I'm in a good mood. And then I'm in Manhattan, so I'm going to Penn Station. A million people are bumping me, whacking me, and somebody really hits me, and it hurts. And now I'm pissed. So my state changes, right? My facial expression is like, I get aggressive. I'm like, turn to the person with a, what are you doing kind of thing, right? My mental state has changed, so my expressions and my behavior change along with it, right? Your app is the same way. If the app's state changes, then the app is trying to say or needs to express that change in the UI, right? In the user interface. The thing that you're looking at, the data behind it has changed, which means that now the data on the front end needs to change as well. That is state. What is your app aware of at this moment? Because remember, like if you're playing a game with other players, if anybody played Fortnite or anything, that's like the big popular game, you know, you could have 50 people in the game and they're all doing different things, changing everything, right? So the app is changing constantly. A player is moving here, it's shooting, that player dies, points are being... The state of the app is in constant flux. Making one change should change other things in the app, right? Or that could be the trigger event. So changing state is what does it. So if we wanted to update state here, we need a means to do that, right? We need a means to say, hey, state, you've changed. I want you to do something. So I'm going to introduce something that we're going to go into more detail later. But along with render, along with this render that is a native method to a React component, there's another one called component did mount. Okay? This is a native React method. Okay? And it's part of a life cycle. And we'll get into the life cycles later. But as part of this life cycle, what happens is component did mount is like the last thing that runs when a component is mounted for the first time, right? Mounted is it's born into existence. It's created, you see it on the screen, like there it is, component did mount. This runs only once when the component is mounted, right? And mounted is you see it on the screen, okay? Only one time. So I want to use this just as the mechanism for us to kind of update state, knowing that the component updates when we see it, right? Okay. So I'm going to go here, and I am going to, inside of here, I am going to update state. So we're going to update state now. When you update state, though, you don't do this. You don't say this dot state dot, this dot state dot, I don't know, colors array dot push, you know, red. You don't do that. That's a no-no. You don't ever mutate state directly. There's a queuing mechanism. So React is like, hey, I have 1 million people touching this app simultaneously, and I need a way to queue up those requests to update state. This is not the way to do it, okay? The way to do it, so, is this. There's a method called this dot set state, okay? Now when we do this dot set state, it's a method. There's several ways to configure this. At the most basic level, I pass an object, and the object has the thing that we want to update. So the thing that we want to update is still like colors array. And what do you want to do with colors array? Well, I want to like push something, but you don't want to do this. This dot state dot colors array dot push. You still don't want to do this. Like I'm back in the same boat. Like you just don't do that. That's a no-no. Okay? When it comes to setting state, we can add, or we could have done something like this. I could have like created a copy of this thing and stored it over here, pushed it in, and then rewrote it. So I could have done something like this. I don't know why this thing is screaming. Oh, because I don't have anything here. So I could have said maybe, I don't know, let colors equal to this dot state dot colors array dot slice. I think it's slice. This creates a duplicate array of things, okay? This slice is just a method that will return back every element and store it as a new array inside of colors. And then I could have said colors dot push and said, I don't know, colors dot push red. and then go here and just say colors. Okay? Now you see I have a bunch of colors, right? This is happening because I don't have classes for these things. I feel like I keep pushing things in here. So you could have done it this way. This is a way you're going to see it quite often, where you create a copy of the thing, you do the thing, and then you rewrite that whole array back. That's one way to do it, okay? The other way that I think is more efficient is that state gives us an option to see what the previous state was. The previous thing that we can mutate because it's not the existing state. With that, we could have done something like this. I could have said prev state. I could have done this. And now I have prev state, which is the old state. It's the old kind of state that it was. And what I could have done is do a new version of array the spread operator. So this is a new ES6 thing, which is this. Dot, 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 prev state, dot, colors array. This represents the old array. So the dot, dot, dot here is the spread operator. And what it does is it takes an array and it spreads it open. So it takes everything out of the array and puts it into here, one element at a time. It's like you're looping over it, returning a brand new array. And then I can just do this, watch, comma, add the new color, red. And it would add the new color. So I could easily just add a brand new color here, okay?
Is prev state defined whenever you create state?
Yeah, so prev state is just React's way of creating a backup copy of the state as it exists now. But if you're mutating prev state, you're not really mutating state. It's like a duplicate copy. It's almost like this.
Could you have pushed, could you make like colors arrays equal to prev state push red?
You could, but you won't. Like this is the way to do stuff now, where you elicit the things out of the array and you add one. This is how you're going to see it. There's multiple ways to get things done in React. I'm just kind of showing you the way that you are going to see it. And for the most part, it is going to be this way, where you just elicit the things out using the spread operator and then just add the one thing that you want towards the end of it.
And can you use the spread operator as the second item of a thing like this?
Oh yeah, I could have put red here, right? I could have put it before it. Doesn't really matter where it goes. If it's behind it, then red gets added first, and then the rest of the things get added afterwards. Okay? So it doesn't really matter. Most of the times when you're working with arrays, you push something to the end of the array. Like that's the common practice, right? Push it to the end, let it sit in the end. Okay? So this is our way of updating state right now. Okay? So I'm going to just comment these two out because this was kind of the old way, right? This is the old way of doing it, and this is the new way, right? This is the new way. This was kind of the old way. And you'll see them both ways. So now that I've updated state, I'm pushing something. Now, once again, my colors themselves are all being white. So I'm going to refresh this because I want to see, I've been pushing things into this thing. And now I'm going to go back to app. And I see that I only have the one color, right? I only have one additional thing in there. It's white because I don't have a class for red. If I did have a class for red, if I went to, I don't know, styles, do I have styles? I don't know where I'm getting the classes for red. Maybe
it's in public styles.
Public styles, right? Yeah. So in public styles here, if I added a new class for red, right, if I just took this and said red, and said red, I'd get red. I don't know why. Right? I think I have to refresh this thing also for it to take effect. If I do, it should be a class of red, right? This obviously using classes isn't the optimal approach for this. It's not optimal, okay? So that's how we update state, okay? I'm adding this component did mount to show you what it's like to add states without us doing anything, without any interaction, because we haven't gotten into events. We haven't triggered anything, and that's like at least another 30 minutes of explaining that. We don't have time to get into events, so I just wanted to explore state, what's involved with updating state. And this is how you update state, using the this.setState keyword. That's important. Pre-state represents the previous version of state, and because this is an array of colors, I'm using the spread operator here to spread it open, to grab all the colors, to add my new color, and then to rewrite this brand new array back over the old array. Like that's the old array, this is the new array. It's really what we're doing with state, okay? We could have changed the title too. At the same time, I could have said title is equal to another color, I'm just gonna change it to another color app. Let's see if this works. Look, right? So the component itself has the ability to change its data. It was originally given Joe's amazing app, and because set state happened within it, it's like, oh, forget about what was passed down, something's changed. I'm gonna give myself a new name, and I gave myself a new name, okay? Does that make sense?
Well, spread operator is just basically splicing the array, right?
That's really, the spread operator is kind of doing what this did.
That's understood, okay.
Right? So the replacement for splice is the spread operator. And I can put here replacement for splice is the spread operator. Okay? It's a spread operator.
Joe?
Yeah.
Is there a reason why you define state outside of the component did mount, or it doesn't matter whether you're doing it inside or outside of it?
Well, because I'm trying to regulate the flow of the execution. If I put this outside of this, so if what we're saying is I take this and I put it like here. Right?
Oh, no. I meant state object.
Oh, this right here?
Yeah.
Oh, that's just a new way of doing it in React. With version 16.0, you don't need to have a constructor anymore. You can have this freestanding state variable right there. But you can't do this, though. You can't say like const state or let state. That won't work. You just give it a static variable name of state.
Sorry, what I meant is that, is it okay to have that inside the component did mount?
Oh, you mean state this?
Yeah.
I wouldn't you don't put it inside of anything. When you define state, you're going to define it as the very first thing in your component. If your component is going to have state, this is where you're going to see it. You're going to see it on the second line after you defined your component.
Is state inherited?
Is state inherited? The usage of state, like the component is looking for this thing called state. Like that's what it's looking for. So state right now isn't necessarily being inherited from the index. Like the index isn't passing state, but the idea or the concept of state is being inherited from the React extends component.
Understood. But does form have access to app's state?
No, because we haven't passed it down yet. We'd have to pass that down. State is localized to the component, and it's the values inside of state are only available to the child components if I pass them variable values down. If I don't pass anything to it, then it has nothing. Okay, they can pass things up, and that's lifting state, and we got to get into that. We're just kind of getting around state. Those are good questions, though. Once again, like, I can see you're thinking about the use cases for this. I'm just trying to like put state out there. Like, this is state, this is how we use it, and then we need more time to work with it. We haven't had enough time to work with it to like cover all the bases. This is all I got for like working with state as of right now. Okay. Any other questions we're feeling? All right, so let's do this. I have another lab to add state, right? So I'm going to take the to-do list. I'll Slack out the solution to the to-do list because this is what you're going to be upgrading. All right, so if you didn't get your solution working or your solution was different than mine, that's fine. But when you do the lab is going to be add state to the app component that has a key called list items and set it to the list items being passed down from the props. Okay, and then create a new component and mount lifecycle method that updates state with a new to-do called edit a to-do item. You're really replicating what we just did, except instead of adding a color to state, you are going to add a new to-do to state. I'm asking that the to-do item be called edit a to-do item, but you can call it whatever you want. It really doesn't matter, as long as you can confirm you know how to add state to a component. Cool? Yes. Super cool. Love it. We'll do 10 minutes. That'll give us time just to, like, you know what? 7 minutes. How about this? 7 minutes. Let's try our hand at it. I want to kind of review it. If you need more time, that's cool too. We just, once again, 9:48, running a little short on the time. So click on thumbs up when done. Let's see if you can get it done. I'll put up the color switcher here so you have it. Here's the context. If you need to look at the color switcher, you look at the color switcher and replicate that with the to-do list. Okay? And I'll be right here. I'm just going to turn my video off, but I'll be right here.
Azure.
Yeah.
So what are we supposed to do on the second line? So we created the life cycle, and then do the set state, and then what are we trying to change here?
So what you're going to be doing is adding something to the state. So when you set state, right?
Yeah.
Right here, add state to the component that has a key list and set the state to list items. And in the component did mount method, use the set state, update state. So when someone says update state, they are implying that you're using this dot set state. Like those two go together. And what you would need to do is use set state to push a new thing into.
Okay. So.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to cover it right now.
Okay.
So let me go back here. Here is the to-do list. This is a fork version of the old one because I didn't want to do it while everyone had it. So let me kind of expand it. Should be, oh, hold on, see, that wasn't it. This was it. All right. Here we go. So I'm an app. I'm just going to follow the process, right? I'm an app. I added state. So this is adding state, right? So let me see. Can I add state? All right. So I can add state here. I added state. I set it to list items, and I set it to the array of list items that's being passed down in props, right? So this is being passed down from props. That was step one. Step two was creating the component did mount lifecycle method. And inside of that, I called this dot set state, called the previous state. So I'm just, this is, this is obviously kind of like a fat arrow, right? This is a callback. I could put this in parens, like I could do that, right? But I wouldn't, like it's only one thing, so I don't need to surround it, but we could. And so I call list items, right? That's the key. The same key that's here is the key that I want to reset. And I have this array because this is an array, and that's what I want to replace it with, an array. I'm overriding the old array, and I'm taking all of the items from the old array and like spreading them out, like, and now I have all the items. And then I'm like, I want to add a new item, so I just tack that item onto the end. And by doing this, this causes an update to state, and then state right here shows that new item. So I think this was the only thing that I left off, was changing this to reference state. So if this was still props, right, if this wasn't state right here, if this was still props, then that new to-do item never gets shown, right? It doesn't get shown because I updated state, but I'm passing down the old version, like the props that was passed down. I'm passing that to the to-do list. And the to-do list creates to-do list items. So if the to-do list doesn't get a new thing, a new set of data, it's always going to show the old data. So I need to change this to be state, because the thing that changes is state. That is what changes. Okay? And a change, does anybody remember what I said? A change to state causes a
Render.
A re-render. A re-render. Changes to state cause a re-render. The component reevaluates itself because it knows that its data set has been mutated, and so its UI is a reflection of that data set. If the data set changes, then it knows it must update something on the UI, or there's a really good chance that it needs to update something on the UI, right? And so it must reevaluate itself, and render, right, is the thing that shows the UI. Render shows what's stored in state or the data or a version of it. Okay? So that's where that's coming from. Cool?
No, it's is proof state a reserved word then?
No, we could call this whatever we want. If I wanted to call this, I don't know, backup. As long as I call them both the same thing, it works. But you are going to see it as pre-state. Like that's the common context that people write this as. Pre-state is the previous state. Just, you know, semantics. You can call it whatever you want. Awesome. Now, once again, you can feel free to reach out to me at any point in time in regards to some of these things. I'll try to answer the questions as best I can if I'm not teaching a day class or something. Hopefully that was a little slower today. I wasn't going too fast. I was trying to take my time to go through it. Only thing I have for homework is just to do some reading. Read state and React life cycles from the React docs. Just go through it. Once again, you don't have to go top to bottom. There's a lot here. Just kind of go through it. It'll walk you through some of the state. There's also event handling. We need to events are really what going to trigger state, right? I type in, I submit. That triggers update to state, right? A lot of us updating state is user interaction. User click this, user drag that, user did the thing, that changes state. So without us doing events, it's really hard to just play this game of state. So you can read up on that. We'll be implementing state. And then I just had bonuses. If you want practice in converting some things that we haven't done, convert this React cities. Like here's the UI. Take this and build out a React component in a code sandbox to the best that you think you could. Right? I'm not telling you have to do that. And I think the second one is like a traffic light. Convert that. Here's all your HTML. Convert that into your version of what a React app would be. Okay, and then once we get to adding click events, you can go back to this and be like, oh, I know click events. Let me add a click event. Let me add some of that logic. I don't have time to build all of these out together, so I'm just trying to provide additional work for anybody that's like, I want to get a little bit more challenged. Okay, so you can do that. Outside of that, exit tickets. So I'll just ask, here's the exit ticket. Just do the exit tickets. Let me know what you thought of class, and I will once again try to I'll read the exit ticket and see if we can adjust anything as needed. Okay, sweet. There's your exit ticket, and that's it. Yeah, I will see you. I'll post the recording once it finishes compiling itself. Okay. All right, everyone. Have a good night, and I'll catch you. Yep.
Hey,
okay.
Yeah. Can you send out the Trello board for me? Because I can't get into it for some reason.
Okay, sure. I'll send it out to you. So, John, shoot me your. I'm just gonna make sure you're here in the Trello in the team. Let me see the team. Private. I'm gonna go back to the team. I want to make sure that I have you in here because you should be in here. Where is it? React Remote, members, and Gene, that's you, right?
Yeah, that's me.
Yeah, so it does have you here on the board.
Okay.
Like, I don't know why, if it's here and you're not able to see it there, right?
Yeah, it should be the same link from when we started, right?
Yeah, it's the same link. Like this is the same link. So I'll Slack out the Trello board linked in the general Slack channel, but this has all the links, and then you just go into the individual cards.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
So if you wanted to take a look at homework, you can just go to homework. Right, John?
Okay. I'll keep trying. Thanks.
Okay.
You may want to try a different browser, John.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'll try that.
Yeah. That's the only thing that I could think. I can't think what else would have stopped you from getting access to it.
Okay.
Cool. All right. All right, everyone. Exit tickets. I'll read them later. Have a good night. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You got it.
Night.
Thanks.